Healing Light takes you on a journey where you'll explore the nuances of energy. You'll visit the angelic realms and study the ancient wisdom and teachings of spirituality. We want you to reach within and discover the magnificent being that you came here to be. We help shine God's divine healing light by bringing love, light, and blessings into your world. And now, here is the host of Healing Light, Teri Van Horn.
And welcome to Healing Light. This is Teri Van Horn, and just want to say a quick thanks to everybody who's here, and also a huge thank you to the wonderful people over at OMTimes Radio for having me as part of their team. Now, a lot of people refer to me as a spiritual mentor, but I'm also like a Reiki master healer and teacher. I work a lot with distant healing, and I work with crystal and vibrational healing, a lot of sound, and I do intuitive readings, counseling, and I'm a medical intuitive. Now, I also represent this huge consortium of angels and guides, and, actually they kind of like flow in and out as to who's there and available to help out and be around at any given time, but they refer to themselves as the fifth element. And the fifth element's really kind of cool. I totally rejected the name at first because I thought of that really awful sci-fi movie. But as I began to work with them, I realized, the fifth element is all about love. And that's what pulls everything else together. So even though I might translate or be able to share some of the information that they send us, the fifth element really is more about us being an instrument of love. And that's why we all need to really focus on this and work towards it, because they keep telling me it's not about them. It's about the message, and it's about us all sharing, every aspect of our lives with light and love just as much as possible. So they really, really want to make sure that we're all aware that we are all part of the fifth element. So we all have a responsibility to help share love and to raise the vibrational frequency of the planet. So sounds kind of like a daunting task, but I know we're all up for it. And I know that we can do it, each one of us in our own way, to help really make a huge improvement in our world. Now, in my spare time, which I have probably about 20 minutes of every day, I have written several books, and today we're going to talk about one that has not yet been released because I'm still working on it. This one has come, very slowly. But then whenever it comes, it just comes, in a rush. All sorts of different information. So the title is called the Lemurian Code, and it's wisdom from the past to help transform the future. Now, a lot of people have questions about Lemuria because, they've heard about Atlantis. And they know a lot of information about Atlantis because of the Greeks and Plato. Edgar Cayce talked about Atlantis. And, there were a lot of people throughout history that discussed this amazing, mysterious continent that was out in the oceans, out, as Plato described it, it was out past the Pillars of Hercules. And it was just a beautiful utopian place. And it held more power than any other place in the known world. Atlantis was pretty spectacular. And, there are debates as to when the first acknowledgement of Atlantis was. But it appears right now that it is, with Plato's works, written around 360 BC. But there's another teacher that was named Solon who claimed to have heard about Atlantis 300 years before Plato. And he was told about this mysterious island, this beautiful place by Egyptian priests. And they have studied about it in their ancient text. So we keep moving just further and further and further back with the mysteries of Atlantis. So we're not really sure exactly where this originally came from. But Atlantis has always kind of been in the, not really the mainstream, but, when you ask people about it, they at least recognize a little bit about Atlantis. Now, Lemuria is a little bit different. Lemuria didn't have the marketing team that Atlantis did, basically. And so we don't know quite as much about this wonderful and amazing magical place. Now, let's go back to Atlantis for a minute. When I see Atlantis, and supposedly I've spent a time or two around there, to me, it is like this gleaming, high-tech kind of place, which really, when you think about ancient Egyptians knew about this, but yet it had, like beautiful buildings that were created out of crystal. It had, crystal everywhere, and crystals were used as a method of generating energy. Well, good Lord, we didn't know that quartz crystal could help generate energy back before the Egyptians. That really wasn't part of our history. But yet, that's what they were doing. They were using these crystals to generate energy. Now, they say that Atlantis was a series of circles out in the ocean. And you went through layers, and then in the very, very center was this enormous, place with basically skyscrapers that were crystal or clear or, glass-like. To me, it always felt really pretty high tech, even though we're talking about an ancient civilization. But that is what my personal image of Atlantis is. It's more about, I feel that the people there, I've always saw them as being kind of a almost dressing Grecian. Maybe that's because I was influenced by the whole Plato story, but kind of in that whole toga robe sort of thing going on. And they just really kind of went about their business and did their thing almost unemotionally. When I see people from Atlantis, or I do visualizations or journeys there, I don't see a whole lot of emotion and feeling. I see a lot of science, a lot of technology, a lot of intelligence. But I just don't get that whole touchy-feely thing about Atlantis. That's where Lemuria comes in. Now, Lemuria didn't really come into, our knowledge banks until about the mid-19th century, because there was a gentleman who worked with animals. And he saw these cute little creatures that were just so funny and so adorable around Madagascar. He couldn't figure out and justify where these little creatures came from or how they did it. And went from one island to the other. So he decided, and the little creatures were called the lemurs. We've seen them, they're just adorable. But he couldn't figure out how they got from, the mainland to Madagascar to these other islands. And so he decided that there had to be like this bridge, this land bridge going from one place to the other. And that's how the little lemurs got all over the place, over in the South Pacific. And so his land bridge, he referred to as Lemuria, based on the name from the lemurs. Now that's kind of how the name came about. But, there are other cultures who have also talked about this magical place in the South Pacific. Now, I still refer to this as Lemuria, even though we know that, that wasn't the name back then. But I don't know, something about that name I really like. But you see, there's a culture, a civilization that was referred to as the Tamil. And they were like right around the area of India and also some across off of the coast of Africa. And they told of an ancient lost continent, and it was called Kumari Kandam. Now, what's really fascinating about this wonderful island that they talked about is that it's described in the ancient Tamil and ancient Sanskrit literature, and that it was a wonderful, beautiful place, but it too submerged in the ocean. Now, according to this culture and to these stories, Kumari Kandam was the cradle of civilization, and it was a place where everything began. It was really that whole Garden of Eden that, we've heard about forever in the Bible, but we've never exactly had a place because supposedly it's like in Mesopotamia. But this is, according to these ancient cultures, where the Garden of Eden began. And both of these ancient civilizations have works where they talk about these magnificent lands. Now, they refer to them as being in an area that's kind of like South India, okay? But it was lost to the oceans. And they had this dynasty of kings that flourished for over 4,400 years in the main city that they called Timuray. And there was a second dynasty that lasted 3,700 years in another city called Capitopirum. And I'm terrible on the enunciations, I know. But both cities in this magnificent island, this beautiful land, were lost into the oceans and destroyed every single thing so that they had to begin again. We had a reset. Now, when we get back, we're going to talk about a little bit more of ancient.
You're listening to OTR-FM, part of the IOM radio network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hi everyone, this is Shay Parker, the host of Best of the Best, which airs live right here on IOM Radio every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm super excited to bring you expert guest hosts, spiritual discussions, free psychic readings, and so much more. I can promise that you will not want to miss this one-of-a-kind, fun, yet touching, down-to-earth show. Join us every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific on OTR-FM. This is Shay Parker, and I can't wait to see you there.
The name is Bond. James Bond.
No, the name is Joe. The Joe Show. And we are returning back for our 9th season here on OMTimes Radio. So tune in every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, on OMTimes.com/mobile. You can take us wherever you go. Yeah!
Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Now, we've had a few ancient writings about Lemuria, but also in the 15th century, there were writings about a lost land that was near the Kumari River of India, and that it extended and that it covered an area that they referred to as being 700 cavatum, which is a unit of measurement that we really don't know anything about right now. But that this area was divided into 49 territories that were classified by their location and the topography. Now, after this, there were several medieval writers who also referenced a magical ancient land that had disappeared, that there was a horrific event. All the people died, all the knowledge and wisdom died from this area. And so everything just kind of starts connecting, that we have this ancient land, beautiful Garden of Eden kind of thing, and it was destroyed by a catastrophe, a catastrophic event. But you see, according to the ancients, this place called Kumari Kingdom actually was in existence around 30,000 BC. Now, it lasted several thousand years. Now, I have heard that it has lasted, or, and whenever I say heard, I don't necessarily mean from other people, but that it lasted for almost like 10, 11,000 years. That it was submerged with the last ice age. That, sea levels rose a lot and it went away. Now, that could be one of the explanations for the biblical flood. But, there are a lot of people who have mentioned Lemuria here and there. Madame Blavatsky has, a gentleman by the name of William Scott Elliott. And then after that, there were just a couple. There was James Branwell, a Frederick Oliver, Harvey Lewis, and, Frank Joseph, and a few others. My favorite, of course, is David Childress. And, he writes beautiful books about different ancient cultures. But, I was always fascinated by Lemuria. At first, whenever I was younger, I was fascinated by the fact that, Atlantis was like this really cool place, and it felt right to me. But it still didn't feel like home. Sometimes something feels right, but it doesn't feel 100% right. And that's kind of where I was with the whole Atlantis thing. And I studied as much as I could get my hands on. But then one day, and it was really, really strange, I was, where was I? I was at a fair, I believe, like a psychic intuitive fair. And I was one of the presenters for it. But I was kind of messing around before we opened and went over to where some tuning forks were. And I picked up two of them and I struck them and held them up to my ears. And the only thought in my head was, this is what Lemuria sounded like. This was my home. Now, when you're standing in the middle of a huge ballroom, getting ready for several hundred people to come in to, receive readings and, do the entire holistic thing, that's generally not your first thought. Usually it's, I've got to get over here and do this and take care of that. But I was just awestruck. I was standing there practically in a trance listening to these tuning forks. And couldn't stop, so I ended up buying them because I just had to listen to them more and more and more. Then, a few minutes later, a lady walked past me, an intuitive that I'd never met before, and she said, by the way, you used to live in Lemuria. So I was like, okay, where did that come from? Now I'm really in a trance. And I'm telling you, it totally reset the stage for the entire day for me there. But it was like, where is this coming from? because when it seems like whenever I get hit with something, I get hit with it in this huge rush. So I was confused with it for a while and then let it go. Had a lot of other things to think about and focus on. And then I started getting different ancient artifacts, beautiful carvings in jade that had come originally from China, and they were from a culture called the Hongshan. I also had developed this really interesting, not quite obsession, but with Mongolia. And Mongolia felt really, really comfortable to me. And I'm like, I don't know where this stuff's going. I would do some regressions. I would do some things. I would see myself in Mongolia. I would see myself in ancient China. Then one day, it all just snapped and it came to me. What happened was that when it was time for Lemuria to sink, for the civilization to disappear, many of the people from Lemuria left and they traveled across India, and a great many of them stayed in the Himalayas, where we now have Tibet. Then some ventured further north, and they were the Mongolians. They were in that area. But these are nomadic people in that particular area because of, vegetation and things like that. And they ended up going a little bit northeast into China and creating that ancient Hongshan culture. So that whenever we start working with some of these pieces, they carry that energy. And that's how I really started picking up information and picking up a lot of knowledge and wisdom about Lemuria. Because, it's not something that I was just normally thinking about, on a daily basis. But different things started coming to me. And I would try to research it and try to back it up in some way. But unfortunately, there really weren't any references or very few references to be able to do that. And the ones that I did receive, the information that I found was very vague. They just talked about, okay, there was an ancient civilization called Lemuria and it disappeared. Now, many of us have heard about Lemurian crystals. These are a beautiful and quartz crystal, but they grow differently from quartz. Quartz grows in clusters. They have a piece of rock, a matrix that they grow out of. And then they have these beautiful clusters, and then, points are broken off of them, and, they come into the forms that you see today. Lemurians are a little bit different. A lot of times, they're just single stones. Now, they generally will have kind of a jagged end. They are not double terminated. But they're loose in the dirt. I found a beautiful Lemurian, a decent sized one, while digging actually in Arkansas. Lemurians have really interesting striations along some of their sides. A quartz crystal has like 6 sides. And the thing about the Lemurian is that one side will be crystal glass, perfectly clear. The next will have these striations, horizontal. The next one will be clear, and then you've got striations again. So as you rub your finger back and forth on these striations, which you can feel, this is not growth rings, because if they were, they would be all the way around the stone, and they wouldn't be on every other face. But these are what is kind of called libraries. They give us information from the past. So the Lemurians actually were a very earth-based society. We had Atlantis that's all high-tech, and actually more of like a male energy, whereas Lemuria was more of a female energy. It was more about that divine feminine. And so the story is that whenever it was time, or they knew that it was going to be time for this civilization to disappear, they did not want humanity to completely start from scratch. They knew we were going to, but they wanted to give us a little bit of a heads up. And in doing so, they planted what we now call Lemurian seed crystals all over the world. It used to be that they were only found in certain areas. Of course, Brazil was a big place, also around India. And now they're even more predominant in Arkansas, which is where I found them. As a matter of fact, when I go to Arkansas and dig, that is all that I find, no matter which mine I go to. I will almost exclusively find Lemurians. Everybody else is finding regular clear quartz. So it's really strange how these stones are there, and they're scattered around the world to help us pick up more information. Now we're getting some beautiful pink ones out of the Himalayas. And so those are also love and emotion-based stones. They really connect us to the divine feminine. And in fact, I found one several years ago. Nobody knew what it was. And they were like, well, it might be dyed, it might be something else. But it was this beautiful pink color. It's a quartz, but it was also a Lemurian. And I kept it because there was just something about it that felt so good and so special whenever I held it. But when we get back, I'm going to tell you about some of my journeys to Lemuria and what this amazing culture was like. So we'll be back in just a few minutes.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM radio network.
The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
The name is Bond. James Bond.
No, the name is Joe, The Joe Show. And we are returning back for our 9th season here on OMTimes Radio. So tune in every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, on OMTimes.com/mobile. You can take us wherever you go. Yeah!
Do you have time to read that inspiring book or that blog post you've been meaning to get to? In your busy world, how do you improve yourself and keep your life going? I'm Lisa Kay, and my Between Heaven and Earth radio show can transform your life just by listening. Be uplifted with inspiring topics, positive stories, and ideas that really work. Between Heaven and Earth Radio is conscious living for your soul, every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM radio network.
And this is Teri Van Horn. You're listening to Healing Light, and we're talking about Lemuria today. Now, as I said, Lemuria is something that's been gradually increasing in my consciousness over the past few years. But it would just be in things that really kind of floored me because they would be sudden, totally, totally unexpected. I always knew that I loved Lemurian crystals. It felt great. Always was interested in, this ancient civilization that nobody knows anything about. There were always things about Lemuria that interest me. But one day, I had what can only be described as a major immersion. It was an epiphany like none other. And what happened was that, as I'd said, some of my Lemurian awareness started intensifying after I started collecting some of these antique Chinese, or actually they're more ancient Chinese carved sculptures. I have some in jade, some in obsidian. Nothing is formally dated, unfortunately. I wish, but I will say that a lot of it is identical to pieces that I have seen listed in like Sotheby's and different museums and things like that. And there was a piece that was an ancient hairpiece. And I was really fascinated by this. I was like, first of all, how are they balancing this jade stuff on their head? But I decided to do a meditation with this hairpiece. And what it is kind of like this big tube in a jade green, kind of a light, medium grass green. And it's open, probably about 4 or 5 inches diameter. And the length of it is about 8 inches long and is cut at an angle at the top. And it has 2 holes in it, as though they secured it either with like a wooden pin or stick, or they secured it maybe with some leather straps or something to hold this on their head. Now, in looking at old paintings and literature, I can see where some of the royalty, the nobility, the officials with these different ancient Chinese communities had something on their heads kind of similar to some of these pieces that I have here. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. This will be kind of cool. So I go in, lay down one afternoon, and I'm going to do a meditation with this headpiece on. And the first thing that I got was, "You're doing it wrong," which I thought, how typical for me, right? You're going to do a meditation, you get in the zone, and that's the message you get from the other side. So I thought, okay, I'm doing it wrong. What am I supposed to do? And I got immediately that I'm supposed to pull my hair through this tube of jade, which I did. And once I did, this was one of those things where you needed to be seatbelted in, because, it was just like, as soon as I pulled my hair through, got back comfortable, and took a couple of deep breaths, I was on the ride of my life. I was taken to a place that was just incredibly beautiful. I was taken there. At first, it was kind of like you're watching a movie and you're kind of zooming in with this helicopter shot down into this beautiful jungle area with huge, enormous, gorgeous, tall waterfalls, gorgeous foliage. There's not a dead leaf anywhere. It is just stunning. Of course, you have the beautiful clear sky, and it's just the most gorgeous, incredible, peaceful place you can possibly imagine. And I was just gasping. It was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, I listened and I just kept watching. And it was one of those things where if I had been recording what had happened, I wouldn't have been able to, because I was just speechless, so taken away by the visions and the beauty that I had seen. So basically, it was like this massive, lush tropical island. Now, I had no clue where I was. I didn't know if I was in another dimension, another country, or what. But later on, I discovered that, yes, I was in another civilization. I was being shown Lemuria. As I looked straight down, I discovered that I was kind of in like this shiny metal craft thing. I don't know if I was in a plane or what, but we were able to slow down and kind of hover. So it was similar as far as viewing, looking out the window, which there was nothing but windows. It was almost kind of like being in a helicopter, but you didn't have all the helicopter noise and everything else. So we would just glide around. And I do say we because there were other beings with me. Hadn't really focused on them yet, but I got to see them a little bit later. I got to see this amazing being. Oh, she was the epitome of divine feminine energy and love. You know, it wasn't quite Kuan Yin, but she was, it was the same essence, the same energy. And probably Kuan Yin was a reincarnation of this being. Now, the being actually was a very tall, it was female. She had kind of a bluish, grayish robes, maybe with just a tinge of violet in them. Her face was like, it was like a bird, like one of the avian people that you would think of. And I asked her if she was my guide, who she was, asked her what her name was. She very pointedly reminded me that, when we were back there, we didn't have names. We didn't deal with it because everything we did was telepathic. And so I immediately was being shut down by a being in a meditation. So that part really puzzled me because it's like, how do I contact you? Because I'm human. We focus on names. We name everything. But she just said, we think of each other and then we're connected. So I thought, that's a beautiful explanation. And I went with it. But she took me to different areas of this island. Now, the island and the people that were on it were they were pure. They were beautiful. They were loving. Everyone was telepathic. Now, it's told that in Lemuria, this is where actual verbalization and language began. And it's interesting because this female being was, whenever I asked about, more questions about who she was, because I just couldn't leave that one alone, she said, think of me as being the female version of Thoth. Well, Thoth was the Egyptian god who was into science, history, mathematics, language, all of that. And then later on it hit. He oversaw Atlantis with all of the science and the history and, all the technical stuff. She was over Lemuria. Atlantis was the divine masculine. Lemuria, the divine feminine. Now, from what I understand, Lemuria did come first. And then people from Lemuria kind of branched out, did a little exploring, and ended up going to this island of Atlantis, as well as other beings who came in from other planets to create Atlantis. So there were a few Lemurians there, but it was mostly other beings from other dimensions. But with Lemuria, we were the divine feminine, which is the complete opposite of Atlantis. We had what, if you looked at it today, you would think that they were, very undeveloped. Whenever you think about some of the ancient and the tribes in Africa, they have their little huts. They have, a very basic earthy way of living, all, hand and man powered kind of thing. That's the way Lemuria was, in a sense. Even though we had that whole kind of tropical island kind of view and the way that we lived, we did everything intuitively. Think about the movie Avatar. And by the way, I saw all of this stuff before I saw the movie Avatar. Okay, so I didn't have a movie clouding the visions that I saw, but they were very, very, very similar. You know, in Lemuria, we connected with all living beings. We connected with the plants, with the animals. We connected with the stones in the ground. We connected with everything in nature. We had a relationship with nature that is just beyond what you can possibly imagine. Just like in the movie Avatar, when they were able to use their ponytails to connect with different things and connect with this tree of knowledge and wisdom and things like that. That's kind of what it was like in Lemuria. So you can imagine my shock whenever I saw the movie, because it was like, oh my God, they just brought my visions to life. But it was amazing because we had this connection to Earth. We had this connection intuitively to all the plants, all the animals. If there was anything that we needed, we could create it and manifest it. We had, families. We had a social structure. We were highly spiritual. But we celebrated the spirit within, the spirit that created everything in our universe, which was basically that island in that area. There were no dissensions. There were no problems. Everyone was completely wrapped in love and light, which is where I got my line, love, light, and blessings, because that's what it was like in Lemuria. When we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about Lemuria and some of the lessons that they have for us. So, be right back.
This is OTR FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
Matt Connerton here. Join Jen Coffey and I twice a week for Matt Connerton Unleashed, a political talk show that's a little different than what you're used to. No liberal or conservative agenda here, just an honest dialogue about truth and how things really work in the world of politics. Matt Connerton Unleashed, every Tuesday and Thursday night at 11 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Hi, this is Angela Levesque, host of Entanglement Radio. Join me Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern for inspiring conversations with visionaries in spiritual science and conscious healing. Entanglement Radio, Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. Transcendent talk for the conscious mind.
Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
You're listening to OTR FM, part of the IOM radio network.
This is Teri Van Horn, and you're listening to Healing Light, where we're talking about Lemuria. Now, we talked a little bit about the society and culture. We did have minor illnesses and things. Obviously, you're running around, you're doing things, creating things by hand. Structures were built with wood, but it was with trees that had already been felled naturally. So we worked completely, totally within the environment. We didn't really eat meat, but we did grow and eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, and there were, just tremendous amounts. But we did use the skins of animals who had died naturally to help with clothing. And then we also learned how to create our own clothing without using animal skins. We were not some barbaric culture, not in the least. We were very, very refined. We had people who specialized in certain things. We had healers. We had teachers. We had people who were dedicated to raising children. Not that you just had a kid and dropped it off at daycare, but we had people who were just really, there are people who are just so natural with kids and wonderful teachers and, are just magical with kids. And that's what we had. We had people who would explore and work, in a sense, with science. But for us, it wasn't necessarily science because we were already connected and we didn't need to have that kind of study so much. What we were learning about is the medicinal uses of herbs and plants, how we could work with them to help us in different ways. There was no problem with people being, causing trouble, being angry, being, difficult. No, people who did things wrong. We didn't have to worry about any type of judicial system or anything like that. Everyone was working together and supportive. Totally, truly a magical place. Now, you kind of wonder, okay, so we were there. We learned about plants. We learned about, minerals and rocks. We learned all of these different things. But, what did we do? Well, when we were learning and growing and expanding there, our purpose in Lemuria was the same as our purpose here today, is to experience life in a human form, to experience joy, to experience love, and to reconnect with spirit in the human form. That was what Lemuria was about as well. And so they connected on a spiritual level. They learned to grow and expand. I mean, it wasn't totally utopia, but it was pretty darn close to it. With everyone, being together. Spiritually, we were able to do things. Intuitively, we were able to do things. We began creating language. We began creating the ability to work with herbs and all of these different earth-based, sciences and things that we need. Communicating and connecting with animals and working with them. It was amazing. So, you might be thinking, okay, so Teri had, this really bizarre trip to Lemuria, which actually I've had a lot of bizarre trips to Lemuria. And so what does that mean or matter to me here now today? Well, Lemuria was kind of like our perfect society. We needed to be more heart-based. We need to be more intuitive, more into spirit, less into technology. So basically, we need to get away from Atlantis and all the high-tech stuff, and we need to move back into that heart center that is given to us with Lemuria. Now, that's a great concept, but there have been increasingly, as these things have been coming to me, and I've been doing more and more research, then, more people now are beginning to talk about Lemuria. And so I was wondering why. What's the deal with that? Then I kept meeting people who, out of the blue, would start telling me about their experiences with Lemuria. Now, that's kind of bizarre whenever they have no clue what yours are and they just start telling you things. Then I discovered that right now, since we're in that whole, fork in the road kind of thing with society, with civilization, with our growth and development and evolution as a civilization on this planet, many, many people from Lemuria are back because they are here to help us so that we can change the course of our path. We can change. We can keep the earth from going into that whole Armageddon destruction thing. We can turn things more into love and light. Now, granted, Lemurians came back, so did some of the Atlanteans. And, the Atlanteans are like, well, we're still into technology, and they're giving us all these other little fun gadgets that we all like to mess with. And that's okay. But the key is that the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, those of us who came back from that time, we came back here for a reason. Okay? The Atlanteans are just, basically they're just kind of hell-bent on technology and power and, kind of like modern politicians. They're a little bit, in that cutthroat kind of thing. Bigger is better and badder and, more power for everything. And they kind of battle in that. And that's where they had the downfall of their civilization. And unfortunately, when they blew up their place, they blew us up too. It affected us. So, we know what happened before. We weren't able to stop it. But this time, by God, we're back. We've learned the lessons, and we know that we're going to be able to stop the destruction, all the negativity, that power, that corruption. All those things that came from Atlantis, we know now what we can do and how we should go about combating it. That is why this information is coming up now. We are connecting on a soul level with those parts of us that were here during the time of Lemuria. We know better. And so that is a part of our job, is to share that love, to raise the vibrational frequency of the planet so that we can move forward and not have the huge destruction. Now, the destruction was a combination of kind of like blowing everything up, maybe possibly even nuking themselves over in Atlantis, but also there was a whole ice age. And what's come to me is that with their insatiable quest for power, they, because Atlantis was divided into different sections, so everybody was trying to take over everybody else. And they ended up nuking themselves. When they did that, we had a pole shift. Magnetic poles on the planet shifted because they really had some super big nukes during that time. During that pole shift is whenever everything else came into play. We had those floods. We had the destruction of Lemuria. That whole biblical flood thing going on. All of that came as a result of it. Now, a lot of people will say that Lemuria doesn't exist because they never found any islands in the Pacific. No submerged islands. And you're right. There aren't any submerged islands because Lemuria got shifted around with the pole shifts. And so it's here, but it's not exactly where it originated because things moved a lot with the pole shifts, the explosions, the floods, all of that kind of changed a little bit on the face of the planet. I'm getting more and more information about that aspect of it. And, as I go through and get all this information and talk to others and learn more about it, then I will be able to finish this book. So actually, I've got so many notes now that I should have it finished actually pretty soon. And I think it'll be something that will be very enlightening in many different ways. It's not just some bizarre sci-fi story. It's more on the lines of history and learning what happened before and how we can take that to move forward in the future in a positive way. And we can get out of this destructive third dimension that we have been in for a very, very long time. And we can get up into the fifth dimension where things are very, very different. I believe all this is going to happen soon, much sooner than what you would think. So I am going to be spending probably the entire month of April finishing up the rest of this book so that I can have it out for the summer and be able to share all of this information with you. If you do want to know anything about my other books or anything else about me, you can always find me on my website at healinglightonline.com. And you can find me on Facebook, Healing Words, Healing Light. So thank you so much for being with us. And I hope that you've enjoyed a little bit of this insight into the amazing lands of Lemuria. And, I will probably be talking about this further in a few weeks and giving you some more information about what's being shared with me. So thank you again for being with us. And remember, if you can't access all of our programs live, you can always do it in the archives at OMTimes Radio. Thanks again for being with us. I wish you much, much love, light, and many, many blessings. Namaste.